While the pain and anguish lingered in the back of his mind, Steve compartmentalized his thoughts. In the confines of his home away from home, the images of his wife's infidelity were pushed to the background. His task at hand revolved around obtaining information about his wife's lover, a task similar to his system audit responsibilities. In his mind, Steve was back at work where he was safe from harm. The sudden ringing of the telephone startled Steve out of his thoughts and processing of information before him. A quick glance to the LCD display caused him to emit a tiny chuckle. "Do you have a GPS tracking system on me, or something? How did you know I was here?" Amber's voice and her words touched his heart. "I know you, Steve." There was a pregnant pause before she continued. "Besides, your car is still out in the parking lot. I can see it on the security cam. And since you didn't answer in your office, and you weren't back in ER, I figured this would be the next place that you would be." "Touché, young lady," replied Steve. The mention of the ER brought images of his cheating wife back to the forefront in his mind. His voice cracked as he asked, "Anyway, what's up?" Again, a pregnant pause was noticed before she relinquished. "There is a Gloria here to see you. She said you called her. Should I tell her about?" Steve cut her off almost immediately. "No, I can do that, Amber. Thanks for letting me know she's here. Could you direct her to the cafeteria? I need to pack up in here, and then I'll be right there." Gloria was married to wandering-eyed Dan and was their friend and neighbor. During the day, Jill and Gloria would oftentimes have coffee together and would get caught up on their soaps. Since Gloria and Dan did not have children, they would invite Steve and Jill over for dinner. Steve cared very little for Dan's egotistical and materialistic nature. However, Gloria was quite charming even if she fell out of the pages of a salon beauty magazine. If you're enjoying my content, consider joining my Patreon community. By becoming a patron, you'll get access to full parts of my videos much earlier than everyone else. Plus, you'll be supporting me to create even more awesome content for you. Check out the link in the description to join now. Through the store-bought California blonde hair and the silicone-enhanced chest, Steve could see the goodness of the woman's heart. The changes she made were out of love and devotion for her husband. Of course, she had to compete with the young, gold-digging secretaries. The Ahole is so busy with sniffing around other women, he doesn't see what he has in front of him. She's just another trophy to him. He's such a fool. Even with it being nearly 4 a.m., Gloria appeared to have rolled out of bed as if she just walked out of a hair salon. In the dim lighting of the hospital's cafeteria, he could see that her long blonde hair was perfectly straightened, with none of the dark roots showing. Her makeup was subtle, but brought out the beauty of her high cheekbones. Her clothes, while modest, highlighted her Barbie doll curves. "Steve, you sounded so distraught over the phone. Are you all right? Is everything okay?" Her whirlwind of questions paused as she had a minor epiphany, but then she returned to her onslaught of questions. "Jill said that you were at a conference all week. What are you doing home? Did something happen to the boys or to Jill?" During the friendly interrogation, Steve poured himself a cup of coffee with enough creamer and sugar to wonder if it should actually be called a cup of cream with a touch of coffee. When Gloria showed signs of no further questions, Steve exhaled slowly a cleansing breath and then answered in a somber tone. "Jill was in a car accident about an hour to an hour and a half ago. Apparently, there's some swelling around her spinal cord. She's being airlifted to St. Mary's Medical for surgery." Gloria gasped, placing a hand to her chest. Like all men, Steve could not avert his eyes from drifting towards the impressive rack the woman had, especially when she brought attention to her bust with a simple gesture like that. With a concerted effort, he pulled his eyes away and continued, "I think there's some concern about paralysis, but the doctor did mention something about sensation in her toes." He wouldn't commit, though, to a definite answer. "I guess we'll know more after the surgery. What was she doing out that late at night? Were the boys with her?" Gloria found a chair and sat down, overcome with her friend's tragedy. Steve shook his head. "No, they're away at college. Jake decided it would be cool to get a summer job up there, so that he had spending money for when school started. And Justin had moved out a while ago, now that he's a junior and ready to be a man." As he talked about the boys, a sense of pride overwhelmed him. "I called them to let them know their mother was in an accident." She inquired, "So what happened? Do you know? Did she say anything to you? Steve took a long sip of his coffee in an effort to curb his tongue. He savored the flavor, calming himself before saying, I don't know exactly what happened. I haven't seen a police report of the accident, though Jimmy was going to find out for me. And the ER staff was busy stabilizing her that I couldn't get in there to see her. Gloria narrowed her eyes, sensing a bit of half-truths in Steve's response. Steve, what is it? What's wrong? There's something you're not telling me. With all the pent-up emotion built up in his heart, Steve stood up from his chair and began to pace. Has she said anything to you? Not today, but in the last month or so? He threw his hands up in the air in a helpless gesture. About anything? About me? About how I'm spending too much time at work, or about me not going to gym with her? He sighed, pleading for some sense of understanding from his wife's confidant. Anything? Just your typical ragging on the husband nonsense that every wife says about their husband. I'm sure it's the same with you and the guys. How we are total B and do nothing but nag, nag, nag. Gloria answers was tempered with uncertainty and confusion. Steve continued his pacing circuit, looking for some kind of answer or some kind of revelation. Then what about other men? She's been going to the gym a lot. I mean, she looks fantastic. Does she talk about the guys at the gym? Well, she has talked about a few guys, but it was all BOB fodder. I don't think any of it was serious. You know, just like men looking to some big-chest actress wearing nothing but a bikini in some B-movie. Explained the good neighbor, though the tone in her voice conveyed that she knew more. Bob fodder? What the hell is that? Snapped Steve, unable to contain the rage within his heart to lash out at someone for his wife's infidelity. The unexpected burst caused Gloria to recoil. In a defensive tone, she said, BOB stands for battery-operated boyfriend. You know, her VB? Steve, don't get so bent out of shape. It's only her vibe. There's nothing to be insecure about. She loves you. Lies. His voice carried just a little too loudly in the empty cafeteria. Steve took a deep breath in an attempt to regain composure. With a stern look, Steve lashed out, Bullshit, Gloria. When a guy jay off to some movie star beauty queen, the likelihood of that guy stumbling into that actress and getting her in his bed is like 1,000,000 to 1. It's never going to happen. He exhales before pursing his lips. His eyes bore holes into his neighbor's trophy wife in an attempt to see her thoughts. When you fantasize about the next-door neighbor or the guy at the gym you see every day, the chances of something happening increases exponentially. Gloria failed to hold back the whimsical laughter. She did her best to be sympathetic to Steve's outburst as she explained, Steve, I've seen the way you look at me, or rather my chest. I'm all right with that. After all, they're store-bought and should be appreciated. She attempted a smile to lighten the mood. So you can't tell me you don't fantasize about me, or some of the nurses that work here. I bet you have a few naughty nurse scenes in your fantasies. Steve's shoulders dropped, succumbing to the frustration. Okay, yes, I fantasize from time to time. However, you know what? There's a difference between fantasy and reality. I never take fantasy into the real world. Fantasy is just that, fantasy. Something make-believe and would never happen in real life. Gloria reached out to him, placing her hand upon his forearm and gave a gentle squeeze. Jill would never do anything like that, Steve. It's all just girl talk. Again, she smiled at him in an attempt to lighten the mood. Don't you trust her? Steve broke away from the touch, much like a sailor avoiding the call of the deadly siren. Not anymore. It was one thing to think the words, but it was another thing to actually say them. When Steve spoke the word aloud, it made them real. The dam broke. Tears filled his eyes as he collapsed into his chair. Defeated, he said, I caught them. I saw them in my own bed. The revelation took her breath away. She asked softly, Caught who? What can you tell me about Christopher Whitman? The question sounded like it should be coming from a detective, interrogating a person of interest to a crime. Steve watched Gloria closely for any signs of deceit or recognition. Her eyes widened in shock as Steve mentioned the name. Carefully, she shook her head and did her best to sound unsure. I don't know who that is, Steve. Is he a friend of yours? He tilted his head, giving the woman an expectant look that suggested he did not believe her. He clucked his tongue before responding in a challenging manner. Christopher Whitman works for your husband's trucking company. Do I need to go ask him who he is? Resigned to her fate, Gloria downturned her eyes and relented. All right. Chris was a forklift operator at one of my husband's warehouses. With the economy taking a downturn and Dan needing to eliminate some of the fleet, it meant that hours were being cut at the warehouses. With no trucks to unload, there was no need for forklift operators. Since Dan and Chris were tight, he offered him a job at our house as a handyman. Gloria's cheeks turned rosy red as she continued with her story. Jill came over the day after you left for your conference and caught us being naughty. She swallowed and subconsciously licked her lips as she visualized the memory. I was sunbathing topless right in front of him. He so brazenly took out his and started in front of me and right in our backyard for everyone to see. It was then that Jill walked in, saw what was going, apologized profusely, and then ran back to your house, totally embarrassed. Since then, she always called first to make sure it was safe to come over. Plus, she always left for home if Chris came into the room.